we've got some questions that people have already called in with, written in with, but maybe could you let folks know a little bit about you and what you do over at D'Addario?
Yeah, so my job title is Orchestral Social Media Specialist. That means I get to do fun things like organize our whole partnership with Jason, any other media sources we work with, anytime we want to make a video to put, all over our social media and our website. I get to work with the product team on product development and demo videos and educational outreach. And I also do customer service, which means that I've heard all the weirdest questions about strings. And I have a knowledge and I'm prepared for anything you guys might want to know.
Well, that's great. And we've already got some questions that people have left, but if anybody that is watching has any questions, just leave them in the comments, and I'm going to sort of field these here as Sabrina answers some of the questions, and we can just sort of take it from there. Super excited. So welcome, Sabrina. And our first question comes from a bass player named Elizabeth, and she wants to know more about Zyx bass strings, just in general, and then how they would sound on a 200-year-old Italian bass. So what advice would you give Elizabeth?
Well, Zyx are our only bass option that uses a synthetic core. So that has, all of the benefits and drawbacks of a synthetic core, which means that it can be a slower bow response sometimes, but has a much more colorful, closer to gut-like tone than a steel string would. As for how it depends more. I can't really predict that. Every instrument is different. If you have, maybe a darker instrument, then that would be a good string to brighten it up. It also depends heavily on the application you use it in, whether you play a lot of pizzicato or you play a lot of arco or solo playing, or whether you're playing like in an auditorium setting or in like a close jazz combo situation. All that usually has more to do with how a string is going to work out for you than the actual details about the instrument. It's really hard to predict for that.
Okay. And then it'd be really interesting, so we just talked about Zyx for a bit, but can you maybe talk through the other orchestral lines of strings that you have and just sort of some of the general characteristics?
Oh, sure. Just the whole lineup?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so from entry level to most advanced, we would start out with Prelude. Prelude is definitely our budget option, also a steel core. Definitely designed to just make it easier for beginners. Not much going on in terms of sophistication of tone, but definitely an easier string for beginners to play on. After that, a whole slew of helicore options. So that's helicore orchestral, helicore hybrid, helicore pizzicato, and helicore solo strings. All of those are optimized to a varying degree of damping, depending on that kind of style that you're playing. Right, with helicore orchestral obviously being the most optimized for bowing, and helicore pizzicato really having that nice growl that you want to go for when you're playing primarily pizzicato. Zyx, one synthetic option for bass so far, definitely among the more colorful and nuanced tone of all the strings that we offer. And then Kaplan is our most premium product, very often used for orchestral playing or solo playing. Although we have seen some really interesting uses of the Kaplan solo strings as well. A lot of people are starting to use the solo tuning strings in standard tuning, and they've found that they work really well as a pizzicato string. But Kaplan definitely is the darkest string. I really like Kaplan. I'm a bass player, obviously, and I really prefer that on my bass.
Okay, very cool. And dampening in general, then we can get back to people's questions, but just some of these things, I think there's a lot of confusion around it. Dampening in general, can you just describe what that is, what dampens a string, and why you might want to do that?
So damping is the process of controlling the vibration of a string, and that happens two ways. It either happens in the manufacturing process intentionally. So the reason that we would do that is that the longer a string takes to die down a sound, the longer it takes to start up. So that is why a pizzicato string, when you want that long sustain, that string might be tougher to bow, because as long as it will ring forever, it will also take that long to get the string activated. So it's a slower bow response. And so the amount of damping you put in there will control the vibration. If it lasts for less long, it'll be also a quicker string to bow. So that's why we have the kind of options. And then the other way that damping happens, the more common way that I think everyone is familiar with, is just over time, your rosin and your skin cells and water and dust and dirt and all that creeps into the winding of the strings, and then also acts as a dampening agent, and sometimes that's not the kind of damping that you want in there, and that's why we change our strings. You don't realize it happens, and all of a sudden you put on a new set of strings and you're like, oh, this is what it feels like to bow again.
So if you were playing something really articulate with the bow, having some damping in the strings would be helpful, right? So that the string doesn't just keep ringing and ringing. But if you were playing mostly pizzicato, that sort of ringing might aid your cause, and jazz or some other styles.
So basically, you just described the difference in the helicore line from the helicore pizzicato strings to the helicore orchestral strings, with the hybrid strings being somewhere in the middle.
And then what makes Zayek strings special? Those are the only synthetic core, right? What is that core made of? How do those strings work?
Well, actually, the name Zayek is really uncreative. The Zayek strings are made out of a Zayek core. That's a type of polycone, which is just a fancy name for a synthetic material. If you've never seen Zayek up close, or you never cut open your string to look, it looks like dental floss or like doll's hair.
Okay.
Something very thick, glossy, like many fibers all bundled together into a bit of a, like, I wouldn't say rope because it's not twisted, but just like a long strand. And then that will get bundled together and twisted to a certain degree of tightness. And that's what goes inside the strings. Those, if you think about the composition of gut strings, that much more closely mirrors that type of irregular molecular composition than a steel string would, which is very uniform all the way through. Okay,
got it. Well, we've got a few more questions. Actually, we've got one from Adam Booker, who I believe is a D'Addario artist, right? I think he plays on, I can't remember what he plays on, if he plays on Kaplans or if he plays on Zayeks or some combination. I know he experiments a lot, but Adam will fill us in, but he was wondering about, Adam asked, what's the average development time for new styles of strings? And he has kind of a multi-part question, so maybe we can start with that.
Yeah, so to start with, developing a new string can take anywhere between like 6 months and 2 years, just because we're never working on just one project at a time. There's often a lot of, optimization of the machinery of different sizes and tensions happening, as well as line extensions among other instruments. So we can't just dedicate a team to one string at a time, which kind of slows the process down. Right. The next part of the problem is that we have to get people in to test them, because I am the only in-house bass player and I'm not technically part of that product development team. I get to try them, which is all really cool. But we need to get them around to all the artists that we know and work with, and anyone. Also helpful for people who don't usually play our strings to try them, to get like, an out of when they don't usually play our strings, know what to expect from them. And that market sampling and beta sampling process is definitely what takes the longest. In addition, bass strings are just larger than violin strings, so there's a lot there.
Okay, got it. Adam also asks, he has a couple other things. When will Zayek solo gauge be happening? You may not have a date on that, but that's what he's curious about.
Truthfully, that's not something that has been, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. But that's really interesting, and I'll definitely bring that up to the product team and see if that's something that they've tried before. I know it might be because Zayeks in particular are a lighter tension string, and that has to do with the core material that it uses. So I'm not sure how well that would work in a solo tuning situation, but that would be really interesting to look at.
Okay. And then Adam was also wondering, different styles of core. We just talked about that a bit, but the Zayeks is your synthetic core. That's with the doll's hair kind of strings it, right? And then Helicore and Kaplan use steel cores, right? Okay, great, perfect. So we've got another question from we've got another question from another D'Addario artist, Gabriele Raggianti, who is going to be heading up bass Europe in Lucca next summer. Great player and friend of the bass and great guy. And he also said he left this after Adam, but he said, I'm also very interested in Zayek solo. So we've got another person interested. And so he said he thinks that they could be even more interesting than the Kaplan, but could just be my fantasy, especially with the right bass. So I'm not sure if he has a question in particular, but just an elaboration.
It's so funny that, like I mentioned, I do customer service, so I talk to a lot of people about strings, and bass players are by far the most explorative about their strings. It's all about, the right bass and the right strings and the right tension, and it's so wonderful to get to interact with that community. Other instruments, it's like pulling to get them to try something new.
Yeah, why do you think that is that bass players like to play around with strings so much? I've thought about that myself.
I wonder if it's because the instrument itself is so much more versatile and you're playing bass in a much wider variety of settings than you are a cello sometimes. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the varying application that you're playing in, whether, like we said before, it's a jazz combo or a symphony hall or it's amplified or what have you. And also I think there's more of a variety in terms of basses. They're, even the upright acoustic ones are less standardized than other instruments. You get slightly more varied after lengths, for example. But then also just the creative electric modern instruments that people come up with, I think we have more going on. And so there's just more of a curiosity around things that can affect your sound.
Okay, cool. Jimmy McGreer, Jim McGeer, I think. I hope I pronounced your name right, Jimmy. He asked, what's a good string for jazz growl?
Oh, jazz growl. Definitely for that growl sound like we were talking about before, you want to try helicore pizzicato. Definitely that would be one with less stamping so that string really, really rings forever.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people might think about... Oh, go ahead.
That was the end of that note. Just Ziax and helicore pizzicato are two hugely popular jazz strings.
Yeah, and I think Ziax is the other string that I would think of as a jazz string that would get a lot of jazz use. How is the tone? How would you describe, to someone who hasn't played with them, how would you describe the tone of the Ziax and the tone of the helicore pizzicato? How do they differ in tone and response?
Oh, interesting. I would say the helicore strings are probably louder. So depending on what kind of setting you're in, that might be something you want. And the helicore ones are also clearer. I won't say like lighter or brighter, but just a more direct sound. Kind of like, I don't know, it reminds me of playing electric bass, just kind of like a laser on a very direct pitch, as opposed to something a little bit more, rounded that that need.
Yeah, it's interesting, and the other folks that were talking about Ziax in a solo gauge, I think that would be interesting to explore too, because there's that complex sound. I played a solo recital back in February on Ziax, and I was in orchestral tuning, but I played, and they had this fantastic, they could ring, and you could go get a cup of coffee and come back, and they were still ringing. So they were kind of this amazing string for bowed bass, solo bass. So that's and kind of piggybacking off of that, the string characteristics. Jimmy also asks, we got several multi-part questions here. Jimmy also asks, what's a good substitute for real gut without the problems of gut? I've had gut strings snap in summer weather when the instrument was at rest. So, but maybe we could also elaborate on that, like what are some of the benefits of using a synthetic gut versus a traditional gut?
Well, you definitely hit it right there on the head, which is that an organic material is much more dependent on the environment. Humidity and temperature way greater effect on an organic compound than it would on a synthetic, especially a synthetic that's wrapped in metal. So those are, any string really is definitely more protected from the elements that string would be. Also, Ziax strings are stretchier. Like that synthetic material on the inside just has a much greater tolerance for how far it's willing to stretch without breaking. And so that's handy. You might have to continue to tune regularly, but you can count on that string to hold through for you. Okay.
Steve Boyson, and again, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Steve. Steve wonders, he says, I'm wondering if they ever reformulate strings after they're released. He says that he thinks that his perception is that the current helicore strings seem different than the original ones from 20 years ago or whenever they came out.
Interesting. Usually if we optimize them after the fact, it's to consolidate sizing. So for example, I think we have a separate 1/10 size and a 1/15 size, and then kind of lump those into a medium size string that fits both. I'm not sure what else has been done. I would love to know what year we're talking about and which of the particular helicore lines, because I have only been with the company 2 years, so my knowledge of what happened before I got there is a little bit limited, but our director of research and development is this incredible engineer and violinist and president of the Violin Society of America named Fan Tao. And he's been with the company for like, so whenever I run into something that I don't know, I have the great pleasure of being able to call up Fan and get a little history lesson in what happened here.
Steve also asks, I'm curious as to why the Zyx bass strings use 3 different materials for the outer windings. So that's an interesting question. There are 3 different materials in the outer windings?
Not in each string. Each string uses a different one. And that has to do with the depth of the string to be so that it vibrates at the right pitch. I don't think that's unique to Zyx, and I don't think that's unique to D'Addario either. I mean, sometimes you'll have like the bottom 2 are one and the top 2 use another one. In violin, for example, usually you'll have the D string is almost always aluminum, and then below that is silver or nickel comes in there. That really doesn't have much effect on the sound so much as people often suggest that it does, but it really just has to do with the density of getting the string to vibrate in the right way.
Okay. And in terms of density, so Zyx are probably by and large the thickest strings, right? Because of that, or am I right? That's my perception.
Yeah, a lot of people comment on that. Actually, a lot of people comment that the rest of our strings feel too thin, which I didn't know until people then said, that feels better.
Well, another question, and this is a question I've had a lot, like light, medium, and heavy gauge. Now, I think for the helicore strings, they come in those 3 different gauges, right? Across the line. Is that the case for Kaplan and Zyx too, or?
Well, before we even get into that discussion, I want to point out that gauge is actually different from tension. And with orchestra, you're not measuring gauge so much as you are measuring tension along the length of the string from the nut to the bridge. Like you said, the Zyx strings definitely feel the thickest, but that doesn't mean that they are the heaviest tension string or that they are, have all the characteristics of a heavier tension string. I actually mentioned Zyx is on the lighter side because of how it's constructed with that synthetic core. So that's just a little bit misleading. When people ask about gauge, they're trying to ask about tension. Talking about the same thing, but just know that knowing the diameter of a string won't help beyond making sure your grooves at the nut and the bridge are wide enough. So what happens there is, are we asking about what causes a difference in tension and how?
Yeah, or like even like what causes the differences in tension, and then like why might I want to experiment with heavy, medium, or lighter tension?
Sure. Okay. So the first part of that, how we get strings to be different tension. So if you have, just imagine any string, maybe you have an A string. If you add an extra layer of winding to it, the string gets heavier because it has more mass on it. So it's going to vibrate slower. So then what would you have to do to be able to get that pitch back up to A? You increase the tension. So that strings have that connotation of being thicker because oftentimes they are, or they use a different material that has a heavier density so that it has more of a mass and does vibrate slower. The opposite is true for a light tension string, right? If you took off a layer of winding, the string would vibrate faster and the pitch would go up. So then you'd have to loosen the string to get it to vibrate back to that original pitch. And the effect that has, that a heavy tension string will take longer to activate with the bow, but it'll give you a greater projection. That's great for if you feel like you're bottoming out on a string, like it's just not giving you enough or responding well enough, not quick enough, but like aggressively enough to the bow. And the reverse is true with a string where it will respond quicker and it's better for more delicate playing, but it will be a softer string. And often playing with the tension will get a wolf tone as well.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we've got one more question here, and anybody who's watching or tuning in, feel free to chime in with any questions. And if you're watching this after the fact, a lot of people do that. Feel free to leave a comment, and I can get back to you, or we can get back to you about any further questions because there's a lot of confusion around strings. But Gwen Clark asks differences between Kaplan and original flexicores, so the Parasso original flexicores for a bright bass. And I think that's interesting because I've actually used both original flexicores and Kaplans. Do you have any thoughts on the differences in those two strings? Have you experimented with flexicores in the past, and how might they differ from Kaplans?
Sorry, what was that?
So, like, how in terms of Kaplans and the original flexicors, like, have you experimented with the original flexicors? And if so, how do those differ in your opinion?
I haven't gotten to personally.
Okay.
There's big strings out there. I can only get to so many. But I learned in the sense that they are both, I mean, would be appropriate on a bright bass, especially the Kaplan strings are a very dark string, like I mentioned. And so if that works, if that's the kind of, you're trying to balance your instrument that way, then that would probably be a good choice. Whereas if you have a darker bass, that might give you more of a muddled sound. Yeah, beyond, sorry, I don't have anything more specific.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. And I've spent a bunch of years playing on original flexicors, and then I've used them. I've used Kaplans on the same bass. My experience, Gwen, if you're watching this after the fact, is that I feel more tension under the flexicors, and the Kaplans have like a little more flexibility under the bow to me. Not in a negative way, just a little more. There's a little more. I just feel a little bit more stiffness on my. I've used them on two different basses, so. And then talking about tone in general with strings, this is also from Gwen. Gwen asks, if you want a darker sound, does the heavier tension or lighter tension, does that affect tone color? She was asking about Kaplan specifically, but like, do heavier or lighter tension strings, does that affect tone color?
Yes, it'll affect your tone less than it will the feel and like the like how it feels to you to play and how it like feels to the room that you're playing in, I think would be. So it definitely has effect on the sound, but I wouldn't really say it has effect on the tone in particular.
Okay. Great. Well, I want to thank you for taking some time and answering some questions, and we'll post this up so folks can watch it later. If you're watching this later, again, thanks. Feel free to share this out. Sabrina, you were at ISB, the International Society of Bassists Convention, back in June. What were some of your favorite things about that event? I know you were working hard at that event, but what were some things you enjoyed about that time in Ithaca?
Oh, that was really cool. It was especially cool because when I first started at D'Addario, it was right after the last ISB, so I was like looking off like, oh, I just missed it. I wonder, what'll happen when the next one rolls around. And so to get to go this year was really special and exciting. First of all, it's really so many of the that I know that we work with, to finally get to meet them in person after corresponding on social media and email for so many years. To see Christian McBride was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I got there just slightly too late to see Gary Carr, unfortunately. And it was busy couple of days because I am there in addition to like manning the booth and answering questions and selling strings, and also monitoring all the various partnerships and sponsorships that D'Addario is involved in, but then also trying to capture all the content and all the like pedagogical knowledge and just try to get to as many recitals as I can and kind of report back and share it with the rest of the world. I also really loved watching the bases get built in like 5 days. That's so fun to me. And we sponsored those after hours events, those jam nights. So it was really fun to just get to unwind and chat with everyone at the end of the day and see what everyone else's high points were and hear everyone get to play.
Yeah, those were fun events. I'd seen Christian McBride, and I'm sure you were super busy. So it was great. It was great to see you there. And I just want to thank I see Mitch Morang, Justin Leonard, Joey Akuri, several other people that have joined us tonight. Thanks for following along. And are you going to be at any events coming up? I know I'll be in Chicago for the Midwest Clinic. Are you going to be doing any traveling coming up here?
Yes, we'll be at Midwest. We don't always take the whole team, but I will be there. And then the next one after that, I believe, is ASTA in March.
Okay. So if you're at the Midwest Clinic, if you're a teacher or in music education at all, be sure to stop by the D'Addario booth. And if you're going to ASTA, be sure to check out D'Addario and say hi to Sabrina or any other music event. I mean, D'Addario does so many things for the double bass world. They sponsor pretty much every event I'm at. So thank you for what you do in North America, internationally. And thanks everybody for tuning in. And thanks for taking some time to chat, Sabrina. I really appreciate it.
So much for having me. If anyone has any follow-up questions, I'm happy to follow along in the group and dive more into anything.
That's great. Thanks. Have a good night.